Before we begin, there's a story from the Vietnam War that most people avoid telling, not because it's classified, but because it feels like something that should have stayed in the jungle. A story about a sniper duel that wasn't just about skill, but about revenge, fear, and the darkest part of human nature. Marines in Vietnam used to whisper a name with anger, hatred, and fear: the Apache. And there was only one man they believed could stop her: Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock. If you think you already know how this ends, stay. You don't. The name and the radio chatter. The first time most Marines heard her name, it wasn't in a briefing. It was over the radio. A patrol had been hit. Not wiped out, not routed, humiliated. Men came back shaken, quiet, answering questions with short-clipped words. They weren't afraid to talk about firefights. They'd survived enough of those. But this wasn't just contact. This was performance. She used the radio. She used the trees. She used the time between screams. Her call sign among the Viet Cong was something else, lost in coded phrases and local dialect. But the Americans didn't use that. They called her one word, spoken with a mixture of anger and disgust: Apache. Not because she had any connection to the Native American tribe, but because her presence meant the same thing in the minds of the men who fought there. A hunter circling you, watching, deciding how long you were going to live. She wasn't just a sniper. Anyone with a scoped rifle in a high enough position could take pot shots at patrols. She was worse. She understood something few people ever truly grasp. Fear is a weapon, and if you use it right, it keeps working long after the bullets stop. The stories. In the rear, far enough from the tree line to feel almost safe, Marines passed around stories in low voices. They all started the same way. I heard. I was on a patrol when. My buddy said. The details shifted with each retelling, but a few things stayed the same. She chose targets carefully. She wounded when she could have killed, and what happened after the shot was always worse than the shot itself. Men found patrols hid along the trails, not just with bodies, but with messages. Gear arranged in patterns, helmets lined up facing American lines, boots filled with river water and left on tree stumps. Nothing that violated the rules of physics, just things that violated your sleep. After a while, nobody needed confirmation she existed. They could feel her. In the way men scanned the trees a little too often. In the way radio operators flinched when static popped. In the way even seasoned NCOs lowered their voices when the sun began to drop behind the jungle wall. Some Marines reacted with bravado. Just another sniper, we'll smoke her. Others stayed quiet, the ones who had been close enough to hear the laughter that sometimes traveled with her shots. Not loud, not hysterical, just a quiet, satisfied sound carried by hot wind and bad memories. The problem. By the time her name reached the higher levels of command, she wasn't a rumor anymore. She was statistics. Patrols avoiding certain areas, increased casualties along specific routes, men requesting transfers out of sectors where Apache was known to operate. You can ignore ghost stories. You can't ignore numbers. At some point, someone at a desk with maps and casualty reports drew a circle around her hunting ground and said, "We either find her or we accept that piece of jungle belongs to her." And that wasn't acceptable. Not to the Marines, not to the men who had to walk those trails, not to the man whose name came up in every conversation that started with, "If anyone can find her." Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Norman Hathcock. When they came to him, they didn't bring a speech. They brought facts. They told him where she last been heard, when she favored hunting, how many men had died in the past weeks because nobody could get eyes on her across the sight line. Hathcock listened quietly. No theatrics, no movie one-liners, no promises. He was a lean, calm-eyed Marine from Arkansas who'd grown up shooting not for sport, but for food. He joined the Corps not to become a legend, but because it was a way out and a way forward. Sniping wasn't romance to him. It was geometry, patience, responsibility. When they finished briefing him, an officer finally asked, "Gunnery Sergeant, do you think you can find her?" Hathcock looked down at the map, then at the jungle outside. Then he said something that wasn't bravado, wasn't threat, just a statement of cold, simple intent. "If she's out there, I'll see her." He didn't add the rest out loud, because that's what hunters do. Into her hunting ground. Hathcock didn't move immediately. He waited. Not because he was unsure, but because rushing into a sniper's territory is the quickest way to become part of the dirt, or worse, part of her message. He spent 2 days studying terrain, patrol reports, wind patterns, even the time of day her shots were most often heard. There was a pattern. Not perfect, but there. She hunted just after dawn and late afternoon, when the sun hung low enough to blind scopes facing the wrong direction, and shadows stretched long and confusing across the jungle. The kind of light where everything looks like movement. That narrowed things down. Not enough to shoot, just enough to start thinking like her. Preparation. Most snipers pack gear. Hathcock removed it. No helmet, no rifle-turning glints, no metal clicking, no extra weight. Just his M70 Winchester, his ghillie suit, a crude early version he'd partly stitched himself, and a small pouch of essentials. Men in camp watched him prepare. Nobody joked. Nobody wished him luck. They just nodded, the way men do when they know someone is walking towards something meant for him, and only him. Before leaving, a young Marine approached and asked quietly, "Gunny, if you find her, are you gonna take her alive?" Hathcock studied him. Not angry, not unkind, just tired. "No," he said, and walked away. Into the trees. The jungle swallowed him whole within minutes. Out there, sound works differently. Footsteps aren't heard, breath is. Movement isn't seen, pressure changes are. Everything alive senses everything else alive. On day 1, Hathcock didn't look through his scope once. He wasn't hunting her yet. He was mapping her. Where the wind pooled, where the undergrowth was disturbed, which branches were broken in ways shortcuts never break them. Most men scanned the terrain. Hathcock scanned possibilities. By late afternoon, he had a grid, not on paper, but in his mind. A rough, invisible triangle where her presence kept surfacing. If he guessed right, she'd use one of 3 overwatch positions when hunting the trails that cut through that sector. If he guessed wrong, the jungle had room for 2 ghosts. Signs. On the morning of day 2, he found something. Not a footprint. She was too good for that. Not a casing. She policed her brass. Not blood. She didn't miss. A vine. Cut with a blade. Not snapped, not crushed, not naturally frayed. Clean. Deliberate. Human. Most Marines would have photographed it and sent the position to command. Hathcock lowered himself gently and touched the cut with one fingertip. Still moist. Recent. She wasn't miles away. She was hours, maybe less. The weight. Hathcock found his position before sunset. A slight rise with a view through layers of leaves and natural funnels where someone watching the trails would have to pause. Not perfect cover, just enough. He didn't settle. He didn't shift. He melted. That's what real snipers do. They don't hide. They stop existing to everything except their purpose. Hours passed. Mosquitoes fed. Sweat ran down his face. Ants crawled across his hands and never felt movement beneath them. The jungle grew cold and loud with night insects and distant artillery. Nothing. No movement, no sound of a human. Just the long, slow heartbeat of a forest older than the war inside it. Most men would have assumed they were alone. Hathcock knew better. In sniper duels, silence isn't absence. Silence is presence. Somewhere in that grid, maybe 50 yards away, maybe 500, someone else was waiting too. Someone who had made Marines disappear from this jungle for weeks. Someone who thought this was still her hunting ground. Hathcock exhaled slowly and whispered to no one, "You're close." Then he closed his eyes, not to sleep, to listen. Because out here, the man who hears first lives. The first clue. Just before dawn, the jungle changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but the way an experienced hunter knows a clearing holds prey before seeing it, Hathcock felt something shift. Bird calls moved farther away. Leaves stopped whispering. The rhythm of the forest paused, just long enough to register as wrong. Someone was moving. Not close, but not far. He didn't lift his rifle. He didn't even open both eyes. He listened. There, a faint rhythmic disturbance. Not footsteps, the jungle swallows those. Breathing? No, too steady. Then he understood. Fabric brushing bark. Someone climbing. Someone positioning. Someone who knew that the first person to look for movement loses, because scopes reflect light, glass attracts eyes, and humans react to motion faster than intent. She wasn't just nearby. She was setting up. And that meant one thing. She wasn't stalking random patrols today. She was hunting him. The perfect trap. Most snipers would reposition, try to flank, relocate, break contact. Hathcock did nothing, because moving now meant death. She wasn't firing. She was waiting for him to break the rules. She knew someone was close, someone watching her territory differently than frightened patrols. Maybe she'd seen the same vine. Maybe she'd sensed the same silence. Maybe she'd simply felt another predator enter her space. So she was playing the same game. Two professionals, two rifles, two minds. One mistake. Hathcock's calculus. He replayed the sound in his head. Branches, dry but not brittle. Elevation roughly 20-30 feet based on vibration timber. Too slow for panic. Too deliberate to be scouts. Just one person. Just her. That meant she thought she had the advantage. And she almost did. Almost. Hathcock opened his right eye fully and allowed his body to shift weight by less than the width of a coin, just enough to align the rifle inch by inch toward the suspected direction. Still no glass to his eye. Not yet. He needed the sun. She would too. Sniper duels aren't about who shoots first. They're about who sees the other without being seen. Sunrise. The first light of morning broke through the tree line. A single ray cut the darkness like a blade. Then another. Then another. The world transitioned from shadows to shapes. Hathcock placed his cheek lightly against the rifle stock, no pressure yet, and angled the barrel centimeter by centimeter. Then he saw it. Not her, not her rifle. Something much smaller. A glint. Not bright, soft, almost accidental, but unmistakable. Glass catching first light. There was only one thing in this jungle that would reflect light from that angle. A scope. Her scope. Pointed directly at where he was lying. She had him, or thought he did. But Hathcock didn't panic, because now the duel was no longer theoretical. Now the geometry began. Range estimate, 300 to 400 yards. Height, elevated. Wind, minimal. Morning still air. Shot, possible, but still dangerous, because he couldn't see her face. Only a shimmer. A fraction of a millimeter of exposed optics. And yet, that was enough. The rule. There's a rule among elite snipers. When two scopes meet, only one trigger gets pulled. Because if you're both looking through glass, your eye, your fate, your entire existence rests on one line. A straight, unforgiving path between two pieces of magnified glass. Hathcock slid his finger toward the trigger, slow as moss growing. He exhaled. Not excitement, not fear, just calculation. Then he placed the crosshair not on the reflection, but on where the reflection meant her eye must be. 1 inch left, ½ inch up. Breath. Micro-adjust. Silence. The jungle held still. Even the wind refused to move. Then, crack. One shot. Clean. Cold. Final. He didn't celebrate. He didn't move. He waited. Because sometimes death is loud, and sometimes it is quiet. But when a predator falls, the forest always reacts. And now, the jungle was reacting. Birds returned. Insects hummed again. The silence broke. She was gone. And Hathcock knew it, not because he confirmed the body, but because fear, the weapon she'd mastered, no longer belonged to her. It belonged to whoever heard that single shot echo through the trees. The walk forward. Hathcock stayed still another full hour, not because he doubted the shot, but because snipers don't assume a fight is over until the ground tells them it is. The jungle may have returned to its normal rhythm, but he knew better than anyone that patience kills more soldiers than bullets. Only when the sun fully cleared the canopy and burned off the last mist did Hathcock move. Slow, measured, controlled. The kind of movement that doesn't disturb leaves, posture, or breathing. He rose into a crouch and scanned again. No movement, no sound of gear, no second shooter. If she had worked with a spotter, that spotter would already be repositioning or firing. This duel had been one-on-one, exactly how she wanted it, exactly how he needed it. Moving into the kill zone. Advancing toward a sniper you just shot is one of the most dangerous actions in combat. She may have been dead, or she may have been wounded, waiting for the final mistake, stepping into her last shot. Hathcock approached from an angle, not directly toward where the glint had been, but along a curve that forced any remaining threat to adjust their aim. Every 10 steps, he stopped, listened, checked the angles. Most men expect ambushes from the ground. Snipers learn to fear what waits above. The tree. He saw her platform before he saw her. A carefully prepared perch, a branch woven into camouflage with vines and brush. Stable enough for stillness, hidden enough to vanish. She'd used it before, probably many times. That meant something else. This wasn't just where she shot from. This was where she watched, studied, learned. Hathcock stopped at the base of the tree and tilted his head upward. No rifle barrel, no shifting shadow, just stillness. The kind of stillness only the dead achieve. The confirmation. He climbed carefully, testing each foothold with pressure rather than weight. Halfway up, he smelled what the jungle couldn't hide: blood. Not fresh, not explosive. Just a warm, metallic scent carried by the still morning air. When he reached the platform, he saw her. Not the monster from the whispered stories. Not the legend the radio chatter had built in the minds of Marines. Just a woman in worn fatigues, barefoot, lean, weathered from sun and rain. Her scope was still pointed toward where he'd been lying. Her finger rested beside the trigger. Her eye, the eye he'd aimed for, was gone. The round had entered through the scope, riding the optical tube perfectly, traveling straight into bone. Instant, silent, final. The textbook definition of a sniper duel ending. No dramatic struggle, Just geometry. One line, one breath, one shot. The reaction. Hathcock didn't rejoice. He didn't spit on the ground or whisper a victory line. He just stared for a moment. Not at her face, but at her gear. Her rifle wasn't primitive. Her platform wasn't sloppy. Her position wasn't luck. She had skill, experience, patience. She had been, by every standard that mattered, a professional. And that meant one thing. If he hadn't seen the glint, if light hadn't caught her lens, if the sun had been behind one more cloud, this story would be hers, not his. The wait. Before leaving, Hathcock did something unexpected. He reached out and closed her remaining eye. Not out of respect, not out of sentiment. Just because no sniper, enemy or friend, should remain staring into eternity with their sights still open. Then he took her rifle, not as a trophy, as proof. Proof to his men, proof to command, proof to the jungle itself that the duel was over. And then he descended the tree, slow and careful, as if the weight he carried wasn't metal, but history. When Hathcock stepped back onto the forest floor, there was no cheering squad, no soldiers waiting to congratulate him. Just wind moving through bamboo. And somewhere far off, the distant rumble of artillery marking another day in a war that didn't care who won personal battles. But among the Marines who'd whispered her name with fear, something changed that morning. Not immediately, not loudly, but gradually. Patrols moved through that sector again. Radio chatter lost its tension, and the jungle felt just a little less haunted. Because the hunter who made men disappear had finally met someone she couldn't scare. Someone who didn't run. The return and the silence. By the time Hathcock emerged from the jungle edge, the sun had climbed high enough to bake the mud and sharpen every shadow. A few Marines spotted him first. No words. Just a pause in movement, the instinctive stillness of men sensing something important before understanding why. He walked the last stretch slowly, not because he was exhausted, but because snipers don't rush the end of anything. He carried two rifles, his Winchester and hers. The weight wasn't heavy, but the meaning was. One Marine finally exhaled and muttered, "Jesus, he actually did it." Another whispered, "No way, nobody beats her." And a third, younger than the rest, just stared at the rifle he recognized from too many distances. "That's hers." The murmurs spread, quiet at first, reverence and disbelief mixing like smoke. Not celebration, relief. The kind of relief men feel when a storm finally ends, not because it was survived, but because it's over. The report. Inside the command tent, Hathcock placed both rifles on the table, hers beside his, parallel, muzzles pointed away. Clean, orderly. A lieutenant began asking questions. "Where did you? How far? Did she?" Hathcock cut through all of them with one sentence. "She's confirmed. She won't hunt anymore." There was nothing else to add. There was no tactical debrief needed for what the men already knew. A ghost had been replaced with a number. The shift. Word traveled fast, faster than ammunition, faster than paperwork, faster than fear ever had. Patrol leaders who once hesitated now checked their watches instead of the tree line. Radio operators stopped flinching at static pops. And Marines walking through that sector no longer felt watched. One corporal described it best. "The jungle hasn't changed, but something in us has." Fear doesn't disappear when danger is gone. Fear disappears when someone proves it can be beaten. Hathcock's private moment. Later that evening, long after dinner, Long after conversation turned into tired silence, Hathcock sat alone outside the hutch, field stripping the Winchester with slow, methodical movements. Not ceremony, routine. But his eyes weren't on the rifle. They were somewhere else, back in that tree, in that silence, in that one thin line between hunter and hunted. A younger Marine approached, hesitant. "Gunny, was she really as bad as they said?" Hathcock didn't look up. He ran a cloth through the barrel once, twice, 3 times. Then he said quietly, "War makes people into things they weren't meant to be." The Marine waited for more. None came. Hathcock didn't answer because he couldn't. Not cleanly, not honestly, not in a way that fit neatly into a sentence people could repeat later. Some truths don't form stories. Some truths stay inside the man who walked through them. Legacy. The men who fought in Vietnam remembered Hathcock long after tours ended and uniforms were folded away. Some remembered his shot. Some remembered his patience. Some just remembered that after he walked out of that jungle, something dark and restless left with him. Years later, when reporters and historians asked Hathcock about the duel, he never bragged, never dramatized it, never claimed glory. All he ever said was, "It had to be done. She wasn't gonna stop." And maybe that simple sentence is the entire story. Not triumph, not vengeance, not legend. Just one hunter removing another, because too many good men were dying in the space between them. Final line. Carlos Hathcock didn't become a legend because he won the duel. He became a legend because when everyone else feared her name, he walked toward it.